Hello, welcome back to the Bio 122 video lectures. This is video 17, talking about essential nutrients from chapter 34 on animal nutrition and digestion. So, in the previous video, we talked about the specific features of carbohydrates, which are not technically considered an essential nutrient. So the definition of essential nutrient is something that is required by the cells in order to do metabolism and must be obtained from a dietary source. In other words, it cannot be converted from something else that's already in the body because a specific enzyme doesn't exist. Because enzymes are coded for in the genetic code, that also means that essential nutrients are species specific because some species, if they can produce the enzyme, meaning they have the genetic information to make it, they don't have to consume that nutrient because they can manufacture it from other raw materials. But if other species don't have that particular gene, they therefore have to consume it from other living sources in part of the diet. So that for that reason, essential nutrients are different for each species. And for that reason also, carbohydrates technically are not essential nutrients because we have the ability to produce or to convert fatty acids and even proteins into glucose. So while it's not absolutely necessary to consume carbohydrates, there's a lot of other health benefits that do come. And so while it may be better to consume carbohydrates, when we talk about essential means that there is zero substitution. There's no way around it. So now, if we look at what the different nutrients are, um, the essential ones are called vitamins, minerals, but also the essential amino acids and the essential fatty acids. So remember, amino acids are the basic constituents of all proteins, and fatty acids are the basic constituents of all lipids. Notice on that list, we don't have essential glucose because it's can be obtained by converting either amino acids or fatty acids if need be. Let's start with the first two, vitamins and minerals, and talk about what the difference is. They're both very small molecules. Vitamins differ from a mineral because a vitamin is an organic molecule. And by organic, we simply mean it's a molecule based on carbon. Um, they are needed in only very small amounts. But in humans, we recognize 13 different vitamins that are essential. But again, remember, um, essential nutrients are species specific. So in a cat, for instance, there would be different vitamins that are necessary. For instance, cats actually can manufacture vitamin C or ascorbic acid. So that means it's not an essential nutrient for a cat. And we can also break vitamins into two major categories. I'll show you in a minute, the fat soluble and the water soluble. So hang on to that. And when I show the other chart, I'll explain what those are. Well, how is a vitamin different from a mineral? Because a mineral is inorganic. It's simply a element. So things like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, those are all minerals. And they're also on the periodic chart. They are just inorganic substances, but they are also necessary in extremely small quantities to carry out some very specific functions in the body, and the body can't manufacture. So the difference between a vitamin, it's organic, meaning it's carbon-based, and a mineral is a element. Uh, okay. So what are the primary things that both of these do? They actually work with enzymes. They're either a coenzyme or they're necessary in order to allow an enzyme to carry out its function. So that's generally what the function of all of these are. Here is a typical table of the vitamin requirements of humans, and this breaks them down into the water soluble and the fat soluble. And that means just what it sounds like. These vitamins that are called water soluble are ones that can dissolve into water. So that would include all of the B vitamins. So B1, B2, B3, all the ones you see here, plus vitamin C are all water soluble vitamins. Well, that means they're very easily distributed throughout the body. The advantage of being a water soluble vitamin is that the blood is mostly water. So how do you distribute this? You just simply dissolve it into the blood and it will be transported throughout the body. The downside to water soluble vitamins is that while it's being sent throughout the body, it's also being delivered to the kidneys constantly through the bloodstream. And the kidneys are doing their function of filtering the blood. And so they will, over the period of a day, be removing vitamins from the blood plasma. So that means that the water soluble vitamins need to be consumed on a regular basis daily because they can't be stored because they will just be removed from the body in the urine because of the property of being water soluble. The other advantage, though, to that is it also means that the water soluble vitamins, it's pretty much impossible. Well, it's very difficult to actually attain toxic levels. Everything is toxic if you have too much of it, but because the kidneys are constantly removing the B and C vitamins, it's very difficult to achieve a high enough level of these molecules in the body to actually become dangerous. Instead, the other problem that we have is usually we don't have enough of them. Well, let's compare that to the fat soluble vitamins, which are the opposite because instead of being dissolved into water, they dissolve into fats. And remember, oil and fats and water, they don't mix. Uh, so the fat soluble vitamins is, well, everything that's not a B or a C. So vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K are all the fat soluble vitamins. So you should think about that and try to remember those four. The easiest thing to do is just remember B and C are water soluble and everything else is fat soluble. So the property of fat soluble means that they pretty much are the opposite of the water soluble. Because while it's easy to distribute a water soluble vitamin through the body, it's much more difficult because the fat soluble vitamins won't readily dissolve into the blood. Instead, they need some sort of protein that will latch onto them as a carrier protein or a carrier molecule. Um, so there has to be some way to transport it. The other thing with a fat soluble vitamin is that it can easily be stored in the body because it can dissolve into the adipose tissue. And this is one of the functions of adipose tissue is to store fat soluble vitamins and then release them over time. So what that means is we actually don't need to consume the fat soluble vitamins on a daily basis. They can be actually retained in the body for several days to several weeks. So they don't have to be in every single daily meal. That also means we have a much greater risk of overdosing on fat soluble vitamins. Vitamin D can actually be quite poisonous in high concentration. But you'd really have to purposely try to overdose because we try to keep levels that are found in vitamin supplements, for instance, very low so that the risk of overdosing will be diminished. All right. So we'll talk a bit more about the vitamins in the HighFlex lecture. And then the minerals, again, are very similar to vitamins, except they're inorganic. And the major ones are calcium, phosphorus, sodium, chlorine, potassium, magnesium, iodine, and iron are by far the most common. There's a few others that are needed in extremely small quantities. And even these are not needed much, but they're pretty much readily available in most foods. So the one that's most likely to be uh, in low supply is that many people have low iron levels. Um, and iron is critical. And when we talk about the circulatory system, we're going to talk about the function of iron in carrying oxygen in the hemoglobin. So this is the major cause of anemia, is having low iron in the diet. And partly of that, it's obtained in meat, but generally organ meat like liver and kidney has the most. But the best source is generally the dark green vegetables. And unfortunately, that's one of the food sources that a lot of people avoid. But the consumption of spinach, the consumption of several of the dark green vegetables generally will provide enough iron, but those are, like I said, some of the least likely to be consumed things. Okay, so those are two of the essential nutrients, and the third one on our list is the essential amino acids. So you're probably aware that amino acids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen together with nitrogen. And there is a very common structure in the carbons and hydrogens and the oxygens. And then there is an amino group that makes each of them unique. There are 20 that are used to create the different proteins found in the human body. And we can actually manufacture the majority of those. And so not every amino acid is called essential, but some are essential because we don't have the ability to manufacture. So again, remember, essential is species dependent. So what would be an essential amino acid in a human may not be the same in a dog or a cat. So if we talk about where we get our essential amino acids from, well, we actually have 8 that are necessary in adults. Children actually require 9 because it's not the reason is children actually have a higher demand for one of the amino acids because of growth. But as you become an adult, your need for that amino acid decreases. And so even though children are capable of producing the amino acid, they generally can't produce high enough quantity in order to properly produce a sufficient quantity of the amino acid. So that's why something was a essential amino acid in a child, then they grow out of it. It's because of lower need. Now, if you are a consumer of meats in any form, so beef, chicken, fish, so any form of meat. Also, if you are a consumer of milk or milk products or a consumer of eggs, including cheese, any of those substances shown here in this picture, there's absolutely no difficulty in achieving the amount of amino acids necessary to be healthy and nutritious, because these foods actually contain every one of the essential amino acids. So it's very easy to obtain. However, if you avoid eating these foods as a vegetarian, you can actually get every one of the amino acids if you eat the right combination. Okay, so um, vegetables do not provide every one of the 8 required amino acids, but they might provide 4 of the 8. And if you pair it correctly with another vegetable, for instance, beans will provide some of the amino acids. And if you combine rice with beans, the rice will provide the other ones. So if you look at some of the common diets around the world, the combination of vegetables that are commonly served actually do the process of providing all of the essential amino acids. So there's really no difficulty getting amino acids, even if you're not a consumer of meat. Um, so we do call beans and vegetable sources incomplete proteins for that reason, but if you combine them in the right way, there's no problem. Okay? So the fourth category is the essential lipids or the essential fatty acids. And remember what a lipid is this is just a chain of carbon atoms with hydrogens and oxygens coming off. So unlike a protein, it doesn't have a nitrogen, but they really have the same atomic structure as carbohydrates. It's just arranged in a different way. A saturated fat is one that has an oxygen bound to every possible binding site for carbon, and a unsaturated fat has a double bond. So that means it's missing at least one hydrogen atom that leads to what we refer to as unsaturated because it means it's not saturated with hydrogen. These unsaturated fats end up being what are the essential nutrients because the saturated fats we can make easily in our body. In fact, it's too easy to make them. So none of the saturated fats are considered essential. Only a few of the unsaturated ones are considered essential. Why do we need them? Is because they're necessary for the production of some of those fat soluble vitamins. And the storage of them and the usage of vitamin A, D, and E are very important. Now, when we talk about the essential ones, most of the fatty acids can be synthesized in the body. So there's very few essential fatty acids. The 3 major ones are shown here, the omega-3 fatty acids, and it's called omega-3 because it has 3 double bonds, so that means it's missing 3 hydrogen atoms or atoms. So it's an unsaturated fat. The omega-6 has a different combination of bonds shown here, which is also called linoleic acid. And then DHA is another type of unsaturated fatty acid. So where do you find these? They're actually fairly easy to find no matter what your diet is because fatty fish, so salmon in particular, contain each of these. And so if you eat salmon just once a week, that generally provides sufficient amount. Eggs will provide all of these, some nuts. So if you eat fish, eggs, or nuts, but also dark green vegetables again, which also gives you iron. So even if you're not a meat eater or an egg eater, by eating dark green vegetables, but soybeans are a wonderful source to these, as are nuts, or excuse me, seeds. So nuts, seeds, soybeans, dark green vegetables for vegetarians. So there's really no difficulty getting the essential fatty acids. In fact, it's extremely rare to have a deficiency in a fatty acid. Okay. So this is a nice little figure I found that does a nice little summary of what these essential nutrients do, because it shows all of them here as a vitamin. So here's an example of vitamin B3 and a mineral, one of the roles of iron. So what's shown here is an enzyme, a desaturase, that is able to take one of the essential amino acids, linoleic acid. This enzyme requires iron. It also requires vitamin B3 to function. So if all three of these essential nutrients are present, this enzyme will convert linoleic acid to gamma linoleic acid. And well, how do we make this enzyme? This enzyme is a protein. So the protein is made up of these amino acids, and this chain right here are a string of amino acids, tyrosine, phenylalanine, leucine, that are all essential. So you have to consume the essential amino acids, you have to consume the mineral, you have to consume the vitamin, you have to consume the linoleic acid. And if you do all four of those things, the product of this chemical reaction then becomes part of the phospholipids that form the cell membrane. So without any of these, if one of these is missing, you can actually impede the ability to make membrane components. And also, this is necessary for the production of prostaglandins, which is used in cell signaling. Just FYI, aspirin, what it does, the way it works as a painkiller, is that it blocks the action of prostaglandins, because prostaglandins signal that there is inflammation occurring. Okay, so that completes this discussion of essential nutrients, and I'll hope you have a